Hello and welcome to Reed Scholars Live. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Fleming, current president of Reed Scholars. Today I am joined by Christiane Buggs, who is a Nashville native and currently serves as the representative for the District 5 School Board in Nashville, Tennessee. She completed her bachelor degree in physics from Tennessee State University and her first master's degree in curriculum and instruction there before completing a second master's degree in teaching and learning in urban schools from Vanderbilt. Christian describes herself as an educator serving urban young people in different capacities by advocating for them politically, supporting them socially, and pushing them to excel academically. Welcome, Christian. Thank you so much for joining us today on Reed Scholars Live.
Thank you for having me.
How are you? How's Nashville treating you? How things been these last few months for you?
So many mixed emotions. I can't really pinpoint one or say that one is bubble to the top. I have a 2-year-old, so it's been great to work from home and be able to potty train him and see some of these milestones and just make more memories with him. But at the same time, I am a school board representative, meaning I see constituents who are affluent and who are living in poverty. So, I know that I'm privileged, that I'm happy about this time, so I'm having to make sure I'm maintaining the perspectives of families around me so that I can best advocate for or with and support them. And then, even outside of my own personal life or my professional duties, there's still this racial unrest around the country that, for many of us was just lying in wait to be, to be discussed or for this energy to be released. And then for some of our peers who, this is a sort of awakening. It's been interesting. It's been sad at times. It's been memorable. It's been happy. It's been weird. It's 2020.
It's 2020. It's all the things. All
of them.
And so I'm sure it's we'll say fascinating for you to be on the school board right now because it's a very interesting time in education. But take us back a little bit and tell us about your transition from being an educator in the classroom to why you decided to transition to an elected position and what that really means.
Sure. So when I finished working on my master's, I began working at one of our very first charter schools here in Nashville, not really understanding what a charter school was, but learning that it was a public school. And I was just anxious to teach some babies, right? So started there, taught for 2.5 years, and then transitioned to a traditional zone school that was, in a regular neighborhood that was more poor than anything. And so even though we had incredible growth scores and we were growing our immigrant population, growing their ELL scores really, exponentially, we still were taken over by the state, which meant that we were replaced by a charter operator, and I just didn't know what that meant. So I reached out to my uncle, who just so happened to sit in our state of House of Representatives and was on the education committee, and he had a hard time explaining to me what the next steps would look like or what that would look like for students and teachers and parents. So after some prayer, some discussion with my family, I just decided I was going to jump in. I needed to be able to offer my teacher voice because it was decisions like these that had been made without us at the table, or without much discussion. And I think more than anything, just hearing from people that I shouldn't run made me want to run even more. It made me say, well, we talk all the time about our school board members politicians or are they educators? And I'm for one in both. An educator is someone who looks to support the academic growth of students. And that's what I do, even though I'm no longer a classroom teacher. At the same time, I build policy. I oversee a director of schools who manages almost $1 billion budget. So, I am a politician. I have to make sure that I have 5 votes whenever I want to pass something. So I wanted to make sure when I ran that people saw the authentic me, that they, we stopped looking at politicians as one type of person or one type of personality. And I think in doing that, I've seen an increase of young people, running for office in my city, or I've been able to encourage my friends to get more civically engaged. So yeah, that's my story.
And so tell me, I have lots of questions, of course, but just from stemming from what you just said and having to negotiate lots of different kind of people from different backgrounds and different personalities. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you learned that skill and art form, if you will? Yeah, okay. I know. Sorry, that was heavy.
That's one that we really don't talk about much, because I will say all the time, this has been the best personal and professional development I could have ever not asked for. I mean, it's grown me professionally, just in things as small as, what does my signature say? What does it suggest about me? And how do I manage my platforms, both on social media, via my website, or speaking engagements like this podcast or on the radio? How do I manage those things so that I'm consistently updating and engaging my community so that we can make decisions together? Um, it, Learning to speak with my constituents with empathy, but still remembering, what I've decided is right, or where I stand on an issue, even if I'm still, open to being swayed. It's something that I learned. It wasn't a soft skill that I came to the job with. I do think there's something to be said about having certain personality traits that make the transition from personal life to public life a little bit easier. But anyone literally can do it. If you saw the kind of incompetence I saw at the state legislature, you'd be encouraging all of your friends to run for an elected office, because we just really need. I think my drive to have disenfranchised community members, allow them to the table and allow their voices to be heard, superseded my need to be an introvert, or my need to not want to learn. So sometimes I have to apologize to the parent that has a great sob story, and just let them know that my perspective for this particular vote is based on what I think will be best for all kids. And, acknowledging, letting them know that I'll still be there to support them in some way. So yeah, it's just, you kind of have to learn your community. You have to kind of set boundaries for yourself to figure out, what are some things that I will not allow to be said to me, or to be discussed around me, or, thank you, darling. And once you kind of set those boundaries, it's easy to decide how you'll handle different situations.
You raised a couple of very good points. One, there are lots of issues that we've been talking about in a small group for years, right? About health inequities and health disparities, and in can't talk now, unequal access to different education levels, and access to lots of different things. So we'll leave it at that. And so one question I have for you is, when you uh, have to advocate from everyone, from your very wealthy constituent that has access to, technology, has access to transportation, does not have to worry about food insecurities or health care, but you're also advocating for other constituents who may not have access to technology or transportation. Healthcare might be a challenge. Parental involvement might be a challenge. Food insecurity might be a challenge. How do you make sure that you're advocating for both equitably, and having empathy for both, even with different sets of challenges?
That was another loaded one, but a great one. I think I have to always have an equity lens. There have been times that I've had to reflect on my own bias towards what a constituent is suggesting, or the level of fervor with which they want me to advocate for something that I maybe don't see as big of an issue. So um, one thing that I did resign to myself is that even when I don't hear from my disenfranchised community members, I'm going to always try to actively reach out to them. And if I can't hear from them, if there's just no way that I'm getting a response from someone, think or vote or act in a way that I believe would most benefit them. It's not that and you don't always have to choose between one extreme or the other as far as affluence or economic status goes, but traditionally in public schools, for sure you do, because we have such limited resourcing. So, we are limited in the dollars that we receive. So every child is scraping for scraps, even if they come from an affluent family. But that's a different rabbit hole to go down a different day around education, the way we view it. If I could put a pin really quick there, I think it's been interesting for me, as we just announced today in Nashville that we'll be going to a strictly virtual start of schools for the first 30 days at least. The biggest pushback that we've heard from community members was that, what am I supposed to do with my kid while I have to go to work? And this is one of those times when I have to think equitably. So I have to think about those parents, whether they be on one extreme or the other of the economic pole, that there are families that have to go to work. at the end of the day, those schools are not intended to be daycares. They're not, we are there to support academic growth while still maintaining safety. So we've got to be working with families. Even though we don't have the capacity to bring kids into our schools, we still have to be thinking about how to equitably establish partner organizations that will allow for homeschool options, or that will allow for a volunteer or YMCA staff member to be there with children while they engage in digital learning. It's just, so that's just one example that I use, but I tend to try to think, what is it that I'm hearing the most about? Where do I stand on it personally? And then how does that impact those that I don't hear from at all? A very convoluted answer to say I try to listen to everybody and include my own perspective.
But I agree with that answer. I think that's what we all hope for, that you take in all the information and try to come up with the best case scenario that serves the most people, right?
Yes. Do no harm. That's
right.
That's one of my other big goals. Do no harm with whatever I do.
In that, I mean, could you give us, this is going to be another heavy one, right? Some insight. So kind of when we were first learning about COVID and how that was going to affect the school system, and now as we're trying to transition into what do we do now that we're kind of in this COVID continuum, that we'll call it. And when you're having these conversations with the other members of the board, can you give us insight on how that goes? Just some processes, so people who are on the outside looking in, or maybe not have never looked in, don't really know what those conversations look like when you're trying to go from issue to conversation and discussion to decision.
So yeah, another good one, like you said. So first, there's the idea that every organizational structure is going to be different, but typically, when you have a board of any sort, they just oversee an executive director. So if you have a Fortune 500 company like a Nissan, you're going to have a board that governs the CEO. They are who that person would answer to. And so we don't, as a school board, necessarily develop out a plan. We leave that up to our professionals, those people who have doctorates in education and have been teaching and been principals for years. So we leave that up to our director and her staff. They make a recommendation to us, and then it should be our goal to take that back to the community, to have them kind of play devil's advocate with us, talk through different scenarios, and then get buy-in from the community so that we have partnerships developing, right, or continuing. And we vote on those. Now, something that I think is interesting to note that I didn't know until I was actually elected is that school board members cannot talk about school board issues outside of the boardroom. So there's it's the Little Hatch Act that says that if my co-part, my fellow school board member, Dr. Fleming, if we have questions, or if we're trying to decide how we're going to vote on something, we can't call each other and talk about it. We can be friends. We can talk about anything else, but we cannot by law talk about it in private, because all of our discussions have to be public. This is just a way for making sure that the community understands every step of the process. That's what should be happening. Now, I would just suggest that you check out your school boards or your other elected seats, see what their charters say, and then they should always on their homepage or somewhere, close to that, say something about the board and when they meet. You can always request minutes so you can see the high-level votes, what was voted on, but to see what was discussed, I would certainly suggest going to a school board meeting or watching one online, because it's interesting. But that's where we kind of duke it out. Not duke it out, that's so wrong to say. But that is where we have our robust discussion. We get something from our director that says, this is what the 86,000 students of MNPS did this week. This is what it looks like. This is what we need. Once we discuss that plan, or once we have that plan, we open it up for discussion, and we just have to hash everything out, every decision.
And so to that point about being elected officials, can you talk, so part of what you do is advocacy, right? So in the classroom, outside the classroom. In a lot of the conversation that we've had, especially in 2020, because it's a national election year. But I think we're also trying to have the conversation on why it's so important to vote for your local officials, right? Because those are the people who are influencing your actual day-to-day activities, yes, if you will. So just spend a little bit time with us talking about advocacy around local politics.
Sure. Oh, there's so much to say about that. So first, I would say I always tell those people who feel like their vote doesn't count, it definitely does. And I'm talking about from not just voter registration, but maybe voter restoration. If you've had any kind of felony and you've had your rights taken from you, which I have so many thoughts and feelings about that anyway. But since that is the law that we live under, being able to help constituents and community members restore their voting rights, or help them get, the necessary sponsorship to do so. It has to happen at the local level, that the governor has to sign off, or the mayor has to make a recommendation, or council members or aldermen, if that's what you have in your town or your city. And the mayor and the governor control your budget. That is where you need to focus. And I don't think, especially in disenfranchised communities, we don't really talk about city budgets, state budgets, and how it impacts either further disenfranchisement or increased public services that support community members having equal access to a happy life. So what's interesting is, while I was running my first campaign in 2016, that's when my line sister, my sorority sister, and a few of our friends got together. They supported my campaign, and then we started an organization called the Equity Alliance, and our whole goal is to just increase access to civic engagement. So we knock doors. We don't just focus on housing projects, although those are easy developments to target because there's so many people in one general area who likely have not had historically positive interactions with government or around civic engagement and voting, and we just try to provide opportunities for them to learn. But we also advocate at the city and state level and make sure that we are lobbying against or for bills and policies that we agree with, or that we don't like, or that we want amended. And we're slowly trying to build a class of really of minorities, but of young people, period, who will sit on either elected boards or appointed boards. So there's just so many different things that I could say about that, but I would definitely say that local politics should be the reason that you are engaged civically. However you feel about national politics, whatever's happening in your backyard is what you need to be most concerned about. And that's the school board, the council, the mayor, the state legislature, and the governor. And you'll find a whole lot to think about just there.
Yeah, definitely. And I just always just try to remind our listeners that when we talk about health equity, why it's so important to talk about things outside of the healthcare space, and education is one of those. And how our kids are educated, in the environment in which our kids are educated. It plays a lot on their development, but it also speaks a lot to the community in which they live. And so one of the many things that you can do to improve your health and the health of your kids is to get involved on that level. So, go to school board meetings, run for school board positions. But, just getting involved in the school itself. I mean, you don't have, if you don't have the capacity to do something full time, there's plenty of things, like you said, that you can do. Like you said, even appointed positions where you can be involved and make sure that you and your community are being represented on a broader level. So with that, I'll bring this to a close. But how I typically like to close these is try to be a little bit optimistic. So as you're thinking to the future, what do either you hope we have learned, or you hope that we will have gained as we transition out of this COVID era?
A little bit of peace and grace. And I know that sounds very cliche, so I'll kind of explain further so it doesn't just seem like a beauty pageant answer. But but really, I mean, just it was rough transitioning to working at home. Again, not just because I had a toddler, but just being comfortable in my space is a space that I needed to work, and being able to shut off my computer at the end of the day so I don't feel like I'm working from the time I wake up to the time I go to sleep answering emails and phone calls.
Right.
And this has stopped me from, or slowed me from, having to run between one meeting and another. True, I sometimes have them back to back online, but it's just not nearly as draining. And I just needed that peace, or being able to say, you know what, there are larger things, there are larger issues we're trying to tackle around the world. This email can wait, or this project, I can, ask for an extension if I need it. I mean, we're all kind of maintaining and being able to see each other's humanity and understand, like, hey, we're all really doing the best we can, trying to make sure that we stay safe, that we, still engage with friends and peer groups. So peace for sure. And then grace towards each other. I think one unfortunate large silver lining to George Floyd's death was the idea that the whole world had to see it. and having to see it and having to have discussions it opened up the floodgates for other discussions and for us to really talk about inequities and bias and disparity. And I mean, that trickles into every aspect of our lives. So I appreciate that you brought me on here as an educator to talk about health disparities, because there are just so many more things that I could and would say. So please feel free to give your listeners my contact information. But there's a lot that happens in the education space, because it's where community issues bubble up. We've got to begin really talking about that and accepting it.
I think that is a perfect place to end. I do think we need to all give each other peace and grace. And I like to echo your sentiment about seeing each other's humanity. I think we are missing that broadly, and I hope that is my optimistic thought, as well as that as we transition, we will continue to see each other's humanity and treat each other as such. So
Yeah.
with that, thank you so much, Christian. I appreciate you joining us today. This has been great, and maybe you'll come back on and we could delve into
Oh,
some of these other
sure.
issues in the future.
Sure. Please feel to call on me whenever I can be helpful. I really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yes, yes, ma'am. Well, thank you.
All right. Bye.
Thank you for listening to Reed Scholars Live. Please follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, or subscribe to our YouTube channel.